affects everything that we do at the Global Innovation Management Institute. It also affects all of us in terms of the work we do with our companies, our universities, our governments. ISO. ISO is known as a standard. ISO has driven standards in quality. ISO has driven standards in Six Sigma. ISO has driven standards in manufacturing. ISO is a global standard, and everybody recognizes that word. A couple of years ago, a group of people got together and says we needed an ISO perspective on innovation management. And this was led by Dr. Sid Ahmad when he was actually at the University of Minnesota. And at that time, he contacted me and saying, this is a very important piece of work that we're doing, and we should involve GIMI in it. And at that moment, I felt that we were ahead of the curve. But with any curve, however ahead you might have been, the world catches up. And this working group has been working very diligently, putting together a lot of thoughtful pieces together, creating what will become a management discipline through ISO. And so we're very grateful, Dr. Sid, to have you with us today to share with us all your learnings and experiences. Because Dr. Sid is also not only part of the working group, he's actually applying innovation management in the Dubai government with the Dubai police. And so he can connect all of that together in terms of how all this is working. And he's a fan and a friend of the Global Innovation Management Institute in terms of its certification bodies and seeing how we can connect them together. So it's an honor, it's a privilege today to have a great speaker, a thought leader on this topic. He is right on the cutting edge of ISO, and I don't think there's anybody else who can give us a more deeper perspective and a better perspective of what's going on with innovation management and ISO. With that, thank you very much, Dr. Sid, and I give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hitendra, and thank you, GIMI, for welcoming me in this session. Thank you, IXL team, for putting this together. It's an honor for me to be talking to experts in innovation management and leaders in innovation management, people who have pioneered the profession of innovation management. When I was working on the standard 4 or 5 years ago, we were always making references to experts like yourself, Dr. Hitendra and his colleagues who have written and have put together frameworks and put together a whole new discipline on this concept of innovation management. So thanks again to your community, and thanks for having me here tonight to talk a little bit about this notion of innovation management and how ISO has got interested in it and what will be the future of collaboration. So I have prepared a few slides for you. I probably will speak for maybe about 20 minutes, and then I will open up the floor for discussion. I want to talk briefly about ISO interest in innovation. As Dr. Hitendra said, innovation is International Organization for Standardization. This is one of the international known institution for standardization. It's part of the larger, bigger UN system, and it has done fairly well in terms of putting together frameworks and best practices that allow different countries, different companies, different industries, and different leaders to talk to each other and to understand each other. I'll talk about the ISO 5600 innovation family. This is probably the broader name, the umbrella name for the set of standard that we will be talking about. And then I'll focus on the 56002, which is already published and being implemented by many, many organizations, including the Dubai government here. And the 56001, which is in the making, and it is expected to hit the ground, hit the market perhaps in 2024. Finally, I'll open up the floor, as I said, for discussion. Briefly, I taught for more than 25 years at the University of Minnesota. I'm a graduate from the University of Minnesota. I taught at Carson School of Management in the MBA program. I also have been involved with the team that put together the ISO 56002. And currently, I am helping the UAE government, the Ministry of Economy and Advanced Technology, to get them involved in the ISO system. I am also working in a different group within the ISO umbrella This group is focusing on artificial intelligence. Again, artificial intelligence, perhaps another new area in which perhaps GIMI has to start think about it. And I am particularly interested in the business applications, the social implication, if you will, of artificial intelligence, what we call in our language the AI trustworthiness. That is how you can trust an AI system. And as Dr. Hitendra said, I'm consulting for the Dubai Government Excellence Program, but I'm also working for Dubai Police, and I'm doing also some work for some of the MENA government in innovation and AI strategy. I have a few publications. The first one was the Management of Human Resources. This is a book that I have written for Algeria. I'm originally from Algeria, and it's a book that is written in French. And then the second one was a handbook, if you will, on how to use e-learning. This was published in 2011, about 10 years ago, before the world moved to the cloud and start talking about online education. And 2 years ago, we published with my colleague and friend, James Harrington, the Total Innovation Management Excellence, which is TIME. This is also a nice framework for innovation. And then finally, my last book is Using ISO 56002 Innovation Management System. This is the book that probably will be of interest to you if you want to further your understanding about innovation management ISO standard. I'm currently working on another book for Dubai Police. It's about organizational agility framework, and we came up with a nice approach to how police forces in the world should approach the concept of agility in order to be able to prepare for the change, the transformation, and the disruptions that are taking place in the world. So let me start briefly by saying that the history of the standard that we will be talking about, 56002, goes back as far as 2007. And usually ISO takes over a standard or gets interested in a standard is when there is a need for it or when there is some sort of practices around that standard. For this specific ISO 56002, the innovation management standard, Portugal started to develop its own requirement for an RDI, which is the Research and Development and Innovation Management System around 2007, followed by Mexico in 2008, then the UK 2008, Ireland 2009, Brazil 2011, and then the SEN, the European standard, if you will, for the innovation management in 2013. And that's perhaps what has pushed every single country to start thinking about a standard or framework for innovation management. And then, of course, France in 2013, Russia, and Spain in 2014. So you can see that the storm started to gather as early as 2007 to allow, if you will, for what will become later known as the innovation management standard. Because a lot of people ask and wonder always, why do you need an innovation management standard? Or why do you need even to standardize innovation? And we always say, and you are expert of innovation, so probably you know that more than I do, we do not want to standardize innovation activities. We do not want to regulate innovation per se, but we want to create a management system. We want to create a framework. We want to create some sort of coherence in how people manage innovation activities inside their organizations, so you can create some sort of sustainability over time. Otherwise, you will be simply making certain breakthrough and then you disappear, and then another breakthrough and then you disappear, and then you don't have this sustainability, if you will, in managing innovation. And we have seen this in other professions as well. We have seen it in project management. We have seen it in quality management, the 9000 and 9001. And then, of course, as starting with 2007, 2008, 2010, we start again to witness the birth of a new innovation management. So when we look, or when we talk about innovation at ISO, there are actually a number of standards. There are about 6 or 7 standards that have been already developed or are in the making. And these standards, they all have numbers and they all focus on a particular area of the concept of innovation management. So there is one standard that is called ISO 5600, which was already published, and that one focuses primarily on the vocabulary and the terminology. We want people to be using the same terminology, the same concepts. We want people to have a coherent definition of what we mean by innovation, what we mean by metrics, what we mean by breakthrough, what we mean by this and by that. Then you've got the ISO 56002. That's the purpose of our conversation today. I'll talk about it in a few seconds. Then you have the ISO 56003. This focuses particularly on the partnership. How do you build partnership? Of course, we know that innovation by definition is an open concept, is an open innovation concept. So you become an innovator, you excel in innovation if you are open to other organizations. And that's why we have these best practices in this 56003, which has been already published in 2019, that gives you some best practices, some ideas, and some thoughts about the partnership. Then we have the 56004, which was published in 2019. That focuses particularly on the assessment. How do you assess innovation management system? How do you make sure that you have the right metrics? How do you allow, if you will, for those metrics to give you the right feedback? And of course, if you are Google, if you are Facebook, or if you are Microsoft, if you are Apple, you probably don't need those standards. But if you are a startup, if you are an SME, if you are a small and medium enterprise, if you're a small company and you are struggling to push a product, then you would want probably to have a look at this standard. So you develop an idea, if you will, about how you would want to put an assessment system or partnership system. Then we have the 56005, which was published in 2020. That's the innovation and intellectual property management. You all know as expert that IP is extremely important, is critical to innovation management system. You will not have an innovation management system without an IP framework, strong IP protection, and this standard gives you an idea about that. Then we have the 56006. This is in the making. It's about strategic intelligence management. How do you manage data? How do you manage information? How do you manage intelligence? How do you collect information to feed that information into your innovation pipeline? Then we have another standard in the making, which is idea management. That's the backbone, if you will, of any innovation management, is managing your ideas, being able to come up with new ideas and push them to the pipeline. And then finally, innovation operations measurement guidance. This is actually similar to the 56004, the management assessment, but actually focuses mainly on operations, not on the framework itself. Tonight, we'll talk about this concept, the 56002, because again, this is the most important concept, and that's the one that you would want to start with if you are a consultant or if you are a small company. Just as a footnote, I want to call your attention on the numbering. You see that you've got 5600 and then 02, 03, 04, 05, 06, 07, 08. Where is 01? Well, 01 in the language and in the tradition of ISO is always left for a requirement standard. In other words, those standards that you see them, they are not required. If you want to use them, that's totally fine. If you don't want to use them, no one is going to ask you to use them. It's simply a guidance. It's simply a framework that allows you, again, to learn. The one that we will be developing in the next 3 years, the one that we are currently working on and which will see the market probably in 2024, if we keep track with our own schedule, that one will be a requirement. In other words, if you tell me that GIMI or IXL or any other organization is an innovative company or innovative organization, then I need to see a standard that standardized or that certified or that give you that accreditation. And that's why the discussion now with GIMI is very important. And that's why I contacted a few years ago, Dr. Hitendra, and that's why I see a lot of collaboration between you and myself in developing this framework. So what is the 56002? So I'll give you an idea about the 56002, and then probably you will make some inferences about what will happen in the future for the 56001. The 56002, it's a standard that is very similar to the 9000 standard. And what it does, it gives you some ideas, first of all, on how you manage innovation. So here we have about 10 sections and maybe around 1,100 lines, or we call them sometimes clauses. It has an introduction. It talks about context. It talks about leadership, planning, support, operation, performance, evaluation, and improvement. These are the big chapters, if you will, of the standard. The first section is the introduction section, and in the introduction section, it's very important because it explains the philosophical framework of the standard itself, and it provides 10 principles. Without them, one cannot say that I have an innovation management system. So if you, according to ISO and the perspective of ISO I'm giving here, if you don't have one of these principles, if you don't have all these principles, then most likely your innovation system is lacking some sort of credibility. The value realization, the future-focused leaders, the strategic direction, the culture, the insight, the management of uncertainty, the adaptability, and the system approach. Those are the philosophical foundation, if you will, of any innovation management system. Then the next section, which is the context of the organization. We always focus on being able to understand the context of the organization. That is the external context of the organization, what's happening outside of the organization, but more importantly, talking about understanding the needs and the expectations of the interested party. That is the people that you will be working with, or your stakeholders in general, whether we're talking about your customers or your partners or your employees, or people who make event happening outside of the borders or outside of the limit of your organization. Then, of course, in the context, we always talk about determining the scope of the innovation management system. It's always important for you to start with the following question: what exactly my innovation management system is going to achieve? What is the scope of my IMS? And if you don't have that statement, if you don't have that clarity in the mind of senior leadership and in the mind of the people who execute innovation, then most likely you are missing and you are not able to develop a strong innovation management system. Then you have, of course, the leadership section. In the leadership section, we talk a lot about commitment of senior leadership. You know this from your consulting practices. You know this from your experience in working with companies. If senior leadership are not behind the innovation management system or innovation activities, if they don't have the commitment, then there is no result, there is no outcome, there is no actual innovation management system. Also, the focus on value realization, and actually we can get into some technical discussion here when we talk about the difference between value realization and added value. Those are things the standard also explains and explains in some detail. We talk about the innovation vision, of course. We talk about the strategy, and then we talk about the communication of the innovation policy. Sometimes you have a vision and everybody knows about the vision, even though this should not be taken for granted. We all perhaps think of the strategy, but sometimes you do not have a policy. And if you have it, it's not communicated, or it's not well communicated to employees. So you don't have the alignment that you needed to have within all the units of the organization. And then the following section is the support section. And in the support section, we talk about everything that needs to happen within the organization outside of the senior leadership and the strategy. And here I want to quote my friend and my co-author, James Harrington. James Harrington, for those of you who don't know him, he is a guru. He is a thought leader, American thought leader. He has many, many, many books, more than 50 books. He was probably one of the strong thought leaders that developed and established the quality movement, if you will, in the US and in Asia. And he has many publications on the concept of quality and excellence and innovation now. And he led also the American Society for Quality, the ASQ, which is also a very important organization in the quality and business excellence movement. And he always says that as much as we want to think that innovation as a process, in truth, it is not. It is an attitude of self-fulfillment. And I totally agree with that. Innovation is not about a process. It's not because you put a process from 1 to 5 in your organization that you're going to say, I am an innovative. You need to have people. You need to empower people. You need to create, to connect with the people. And that's one of the concepts that the support section explains. You need to dedicate time and time off for people who are engaged in innovation. You needed to have some sort of system that allows you to develop the competencies and the knowledge that is needed, again, for innovators and creative mind to take advantage of the possibilities that they have, so they are able to produce more innovative product and services. And then, of course, you needed to have also a funding and a budget for innovation. Otherwise, people will not be interested in the innovation management that you are trying to establish. And then we come to the core, if you will, of innovation, which is the process itself, or in the language of the standard, we call it operation. I think it's section 8 of the standard. And it simply talks about how we can create a process of 5 steps that allow you to develop the product. And one of the most important link or thing that we need to have in mind is that this different 5 steps, they need to be iterative steps. You do not go from 1 to 5, but you go from 1 to 2 and 3, and then you may go back to 1, from 3 to 1, or you go back to 2, or even you jump to 5. So this iteration is probably one of the most important concepts in this section, and it explains to you and to the reader and to the leaders interested in implementing the standard on how you can create the concept and how you can identify the opportunity. You create the concept, you validate the concept, and then, of course, you get into the requirement and the deployment of the solution. And those are the steps, those are the processes, if you will, that allows you to manage innovation. And most of us, when we think about innovation, we think about innovators in the lab talking about these different concepts. But again, we forget the other stuff that I just mentioned, which is, again, the leadership commitment, the context, the support, the knowledge, and all that stuff. So the standard has put all these things together. So the company that wants to manage innovation or excel in innovation has a nice framework. And then the last few sections in the standard, we talk about metrics and measurement. How do you measure innovation? How do you know that what you are doing, the system that you have created, is actually giving you results or giving you outcome? And as all you know, metrics drive behavior. So any organization that is implementing an innovation management system has to have some sort of KPIs or measurement. And the standard didn't want to force people to follow a certain set of standard, but we provided the reader with a variety of KPIs, and then you can choose whatever works for the organization, whatever works for the context, whatever works for the culture, if you will, of that group. So you can pick what we call input-related indicators, or throughput-related indicators, or output-related indicators. An output-related indicator could be the number of patent, or the maybe of a number of IP work, could be user satisfaction. Input-related indicators could be number of ideas, a number of ideas implemented, value creation potential, impact on the market. Throughput-related indicators could be the speed of experimentation, the learning and development, time to profit, time into market, and engagement. All these are KPIs that you can use, and you don't have to use all of them. You can combine, you can use some of them, or you can skip some of them. But you do need to have some sort of KPI or measurement if you want to have an efficient, productive innovation management system. So briefly, if I want to give you a summary of the innovation ecosystem, if you will, from the perspective of ISO, I would say you start with this core concept, which is the process of managing innovation. This is what people think about when we think about innovation, is how you identify the opportunity, you create the concept, you validate the concept, you develop the solution, and then you deploy the solution based, of course, on the opportunity or the challenge or the intent that you want. This would be your input. And then, of course, your output is the value added or the value realization. And all that stuff happens in section 8 of the standard, which we call it operation. Then, of course, you've got the leadership and you've got the external environment. And the external environment, it's very important because you are trying to understand, first of all, the needs of your customers, the needs of interest parties, the needs of the stakeholders. More importantly, you are simply trying to look at the disruptions, where it's coming from, and who is behind this disruption. It's simply market analysis, what exactly you are trying to do. And then you've got the leadership, which is in section 5. That's the commitment, the vision, the strategy, and the policy. This has to happen and has to be built into the system. Otherwise, you will not be able to create a coherent innovation management system. And then you have the process that we call in the language of ISO, the PDCA, plan, do, check, and act. Plan your activities and then do them, meaning implement them. Then check for the performance. Are you on the right track or not? And then act, that is, act on the feedback that you get from your performance, so you're able, again, to improve for future performance. So the support section is section number 7, and it talks about the resources, the competencies, and other support as well. And then you've got the section 8, which is the planning. How do I put together a plan? How do I put together objectives, goals for my innovators or for the department that is in charge of the innovation? And then the performance evaluation, which I spoke about a few slides ago. That's, again, the section 9. And then finally, the last section, which is section 10, and that's the improvement. How do you learn from the experience that you have had? How do you fail? How do you learn from your failure? And how do you fail fast? And how do you make sure that you are learning again from whatever failure you had or whatever feedback that you had from the performance? One of the things that I learned and really got me excited about working with ISO is this quote that you see on the top of the screen, which is actually on the website of ISO if you want to take a look at it, which says very simple thing: great things happen when the world agrees. How can a pilot from South Korea land in Dubai and then again travels all the way to South Africa, and then goes from South Africa to Puerto Rico, and then land to Los Angeles and come back to Dubai within 6 or 7 days with probably more than 300 people on board? And yet he or she can do this perfectly and nicely and in a safe way. Well, because that pilot speaks the same language as every single pilot in the company he or she is working for. He speaks the same language that the airport people work. He speaks the same language that the control people speak about. So the speaking the same language about a profession makes your world much, much better and much, much peaceful and much, much easier for you. And that's what excites me about putting together those standards. In many, many ways, we are doing what you guys are doing at GIMI, which is democratizing innovation, helping people to understand innovation, making people agree so we can create great things. All that stuff that I talked about today is in my book, ISO 56002. This is the book that I co-authored with my friend, mentor, and colleague, James Harrington. And we were very proud to be involved in ISO for the last 3 or 4 years. I was leading the group 1, which is focusing on the standard I just talked about. And James Harrington was chairing working group 2, which was focused on innovation management assessment. Thank you very much for taking the time to inviting me and to listen to this brief introduction of innovation management standard. I am happy to take any questions and very happy also to explore opportunities of collaboration between GIMI and myself, helping you, first of all, to integrate some of these concepts into your practice, but more importantly for me, learning from your experience and develop as well. I know that the standard or ISO is that ISO as an organization does not have the same leverage in all cultures and in all countries. In the US, for instance, I know that not a lot of people actually talk about ISO, not a lot of people actually deal with ISO. It's a free market environment in which the company basically struggle in the market. And then if the company is successful, then it's successful. And if it's not, it's not. But in other countries, I know that some other countries, they put a lot of emphasis on certification and ISO. One of the countries that I love to work with is the UAE government and the Dubai government, because there is a strong emphasis. The bar is very, very high for government agencies to meet the highest standard. And that's why ISO is helping here. I know, for instance, in some countries of the Southeast Asia, ISO also is a very, very strong and very, very wanted as an organization. And I have done some work with the APQ, the Asian Pacific Quality Organization, also with the Australian Association, working specifically, if you will, on this standardization. So again, some countries do welcome ISO standards, some countries don't. But again, for you, GIMI, you're a global organization. I think it's an opportunity for you to open up that door of collaboration. Thank you so much. I'm happy to take any questions.
Dr. Sid, first and foremost, thank you. If you want to stop presenting, we can get the faces up on the screens. So first of all, very, very informative, very educational. Dr. Sid, if you don't, yeah, we can maybe take the presentation off for a second so we can just get you.
Sure. Let me, then I should stop sharing, correct? Stop sharing.
That's correct. That's great. Excellent. So, yeah, I think this is fantastic. What a great presentation. What a lot of knowledge that you have. And without a doubt, what I see is similarities within GIMI in terms of its mission and vision and everything else. I think the first question for me is, what was the provocation that basically got ISO to say, hey, it's time to make this a standard? Where did the momentum come from? Where did the inputs come from? Because innovation was being talked about for 20, 30 years prior to that. And so what was the critical mass, the tipping point that basically said, hey, this is now a global thing. We need companies to have this. This is important. And ISO needs to play a role in making it a standard. Can you give us some history or background on this?
Yeah, I think you can go as back as 2007 when individual countries start to look at innovation at the national level and try to find some sort of reference or some sort of standard to manage their own innovation systems. And we can go back to probably one of the first countries was Portugal in 2007, then probably came Mexico 2008, and then I think came 2009, Spain. And all these countries start at the national level talking about the need to develop some sort of framework, some sort of standard to manage innovation. And the reason for that, you probably know that, Dr. Hitendra, is that people have different understanding of innovation. People have different perception of innovation. What is innovation? What does it mean? How do I manage it? How do I put a system together? How do I get people interested in it? And that's what you guys do at GIMI. You are educating people about innovation. But I would say probably the turning point was probably 2013, 2014, when Europe Central, it's called SAN, S-E-N. That's the first standard that Europe put together to codify, quote unquote, innovation at the European level. So they decided that in Europe, there are about 20 countries or 12 countries or whatever countries there were in 2013, and they wanted, again, to harmonize, if you will, innovation practices around different European countries. To me, that probably was the thing that tipped the balance towards the interest of ISO. So from that moment, 2013, 2014, ISO, and when I say ISO, it's through members, through the same members who were active in their own countries and they were active in their own European framework. They said, we need to take this to ISO. So this would be a global perspective rather than simply national or regional perspective. So I think that's the tipping point. Of course, we can talk about other forces, which is simply the interest of people into this innovative stuff, the .com era, the IT, the ICT, the AI now, all that stuff is making people interested in innovation. But ISO is making people interested in innovation management. How do you sustain whatever you are doing?
Yeah. So Dr. Sid, I'll just share my story. We were working as management consultants at After the Little and at the Monte Group. And we would go into all the Fortune 500 companies and help build innovation management systems. So whether it was at Samex in cement companies, or whether it was in Bunge in Brazil, or whether it was in Pepsi, we went there. And what we noticed is when we put the innovation management systems in place, they would immediately degrade once the consultants left. And so there was not a system which was basically going to make it sticky. And so when we basically created the Global Innovation Management Institute, the idea was that we needed to train 1,000 people in the company to make it stick. And so part of it was to basically create standards. The other one was to make sure that there was a common language, common framework amongst thousands of people sharing it. So when the consultants would leave after the company spent millions of dollars on the engagement, the company would continue using the language because lots of people were using common language, common framework. And that was the big aha for us. And we said, this is important for us to train 10,000, 100,000, 1 million if necessary to create the standards to lock it in. We have a question from Enrique. Enrique, you have the floor. I'm going to add spotlight on you. Please join us. Please ask the question.
Thank you so much, HP. Hey, Sid, welcome. My name is Enrique Mesones. I'm GIMI's certified innovation partner for the country of Peru. And you mentioned, collaboration and other things with GIMI, which is great. Here in my country, small and medium enterprise represent 99% of all the companies established in Peru. So when we're talking about innovation practices, I'm thinking immediately how we can use these practices, for the survival of a small and medium enterprise in these COVID-19 times, which is, a global epidemic crisis. So I see this as a tremendous opportunity to use the GIMI framework and the ISOs to introduce, I believe, well-developed solutions, to support SMEs that in countries such as Peru is a huge number. 99% of all the companies in Peru are SMEs. So I just wanted to reflect on that and say that, we'll be more than welcome to collaborate and work with you and the ISOs, because I see a tremendous opportunity to how we can create external support to all these SMEs in countries such as Peru and others, of course. That was more a reflection, but an invitation to collaborate.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Enrique. I totally agree with you. I mean, 90%, I totally agree with you. But guess what, Enrique? Most of countries, the economy is led by SMEs. It's not led by big companies. It's not led by the Microsoft of the US and the Facebook. In Algeria, that's my country of origin and country, I have done a lot of consulting. About 70% of the economy is around SMEs, small and medium enterprises, and sometimes even the smaller and smaller family business. And those are the companies that need help from you and from GIMI and from those frameworks so they can sustain, again, what Dr. Hitendra said, sustain the activity. So it's not when Enrique leaves, innovation collapse, but actually innovation stays there. So thank you for making this clear. It's about SMEs, small and medium enterprises.
Thank you.
We have another question from Cristanto. You're on mute, Cristanto. We can't hear you, Cristanto. I don't think Cristanto can hear us. I'm sorry, Cristanto, we cannot hear you.
Sorry. Thank you, Dr. Sid. Cristanto from Jakarta, Indonesia. It's too overwhelming for me to hear about ISO 5602 in 20 minutes, but I believe that it's very relevant for Indonesia. I can see immediately the opportunity to introduce innovation at the government level, bureaucracy, with ISO rather than the GIMI methodology, because bureaucracy needs framework, needs some sort of structure. So actually GIMI and your methodology of ISO 56002 can actually help us in Indonesia. But my question is, first, how did you convince the government of Dubai to embrace innovation management? Because from that, I think we can learn on how to actually approach Indonesian government to do the same, right? And the second question is, where can I buy your book? I think your book will be interesting because your co-author, Dr. James Harrington, I invited him some 20 more years ago on a seminar in Indonesia on business process improvement. His book is a very thick book. And it's very intriguing to hear that now James said that innovation is a question of leadership, not process, but actually election in the past. So where can I buy your book? Actually, that's the second question. Thank you.
Thanks, Cristiano, for the question. And James Harrington now is 94. When he talked about process, he was probably 44 or 42. So that's 4 years difference. And then probably it gives you an idea about how people change. The book is actually on Amazon. So you can just Google me by last name and the title of the book, and you will find it. Now, for your first question, to be honest with you, I did not convince the Dubai government to embrace ISO. The Dubai government itself convinced itself, thanks to the great vision of their senior leadership and thanks to the great vision of their political leadership. They found out that to have an innovative system, an innovation management system. And they said, we want to start with the foundation. And the foundation, you find it in organizations such as GIMI, such as ISO, such as companies that are well established in their expertise. I think GIMI is well known here in the UAE. I think you probably know about that. And that's because the government itself wanted to do business, wanted to improve. So in many ways, my answer is a little perhaps disappointing because there's nothing I can do to convince someone, to convince a leader that innovation is good. The leader has to embrace that vision, has to embrace that mission. And then I come in to translate that vision as an ISO into practical.
That's great, Sid. That's very helpful. And Cristanto, maybe the other input on that for driving standards in governments is, of course, you can try and push it, but when it's pulled, it's much better. In Dubai, the leadership was pulling it, right? But there was also a gap. I mean, the country was going through an Emiratization of the country. It was also basically recognizing that the future was going to be a knowledge-based economy. You can't just be a seaport. You can't just be a tourist center. There were other things going on. So sometimes there was a little bit of a necessity driving that, as well as a vision of the leader. And he felt that this was a skill. It wasn't something that was just anybody, so only a few people can do. So that was, again, another big aha, I think, when people realize that innovation is actually a management discipline, a process that allows you to come up with ideas and everything else. And that makes a big difference, of course. So certainly a big part of how to get governments to really embrace innovation. You need somebody in the government who says, I believe in this thing. And also they should believe that their people need training, that people need processes, they need systems, a framework by which they can all duplicate and replicate. And then there's also another mindset that every government which comes and the next one which comes along, the last guys, as they leave, the new guy doesn't destroy everything that the last guy did, right? And so you need to somehow make sure that some of these processes and systems are maintained over time. And that's what frameworks do. Frameworks go above the government, they go above the organization, and they're virtual and they last forever. Max, you have a question on this also? So
yes. First of all, thanks a lot.
Yours.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dr. Sid. I heard a lot about.
I think Dr. Sid has dropped out for a second. Oh, there he is. I can see Dr. Sid again. I thought I lost him for a second.
Is Dr. Sid here? Okay, I think he's here. Dr. Sid, thanks a lot for your explanation. I hear about ISO 56002 a lot also here in Italy / Europe. One question, sir, I know that it's a dumb question, but I see many elements of design thinking, of GIMI, of lean innovation in the processes that you indicated, or ISO certified, Dr. Sid. So if one of the companies takes a GIMI training and does a GIMI workshop, and the processes are similar to those who you have shown in your presentation, does this mean that a company can also seek for an ISO certification? Oh, you're on mute, Dr. Sid.
Yes, Mr. Massimo, thanks for the question. And the short answer, yes. If you have that knowledge, if you have that background, if you have that foundation, whether you get it from GIMI or you get it from another place, you are already on your way to be certified. Now, two comments, Mr. Massimo. Number one, the ISO 56002, the one we are talking about today, is not certifiable standard. This is just a guidance.
Okay.
This is as good and similar to your book of knowledge, the GIMI book of knowledge. Okay. So this is simply a set of best practices, a set of ideas, a set of thoughts that ISO does not own them because it's knowledge, it's public knowledge. Most likely as experts, we brought them from a variety of sources, from research, from university, from practices, from experts, from a variety of things, and we put them together. And that's why you see the similarity between what you have in GIMI and what we have in ISO. So if you have done already a lot of training, if your company, the company you're working with them, and you see that you have coached them enough, and those concepts that we talked about and the concepts that you have in GIMI, they are already advanced, then most likely you can suggest to them to start looking at ISO because they do have the foundation. Now, 4 years from now, 3 years from now, ISO becomes a requirement, and that's where it gets tricky. In 2014, when we have this new standard, which will be called 56001, which will be published in 2024, that's the target date. If the company you're working with, they want to be certified or they want to be ISO certified, then in addition to what you have given them for GIMI, you would want probably also to use the ISO itself standard, the 56000 and 56001, and have them also implement their concepts so they become certifiable for that ISO. So that's how I would address your question. But I think for now, whatever you are doing in GIMI is very similar to what ISO standard is talking about. So you do not need to worry or do more than what you are doing. Now, if your customer, if the person you're working with, the company you're working with, they say, no, I want actually ISO. I don't want GIMI, I want ISO. Then of course you can give them also ISO because you are working, the concept you're using at GIMI are very, very close. And this is something that Dr. Hitendra and I talked about a couple of years ago. perhaps one thing I can add to your organization is probably to have James Harrington, myself, look at what you have in terms of practices and then simply say or write a comment or a paper that whatever content you are doing is very similar to innovation. Of course, I cannot certify you because the standard is not certifiable. So I have no authority to certify something that is not certifiable, right? But maybe in 2014, when the standard, the mandatory standard becomes published, then at that moment, perhaps you will need to be officially certified.
Thanks, Dr. Sid. Very clear.
Dr. Sid, I'm going to just change a little bit of the spotlights here. And there you go. So, Dr. Sid, the standards that are emerging, if we were to look at the role of GIMI post 2024, what would ISO like GIMI to be doing to make sure that ISO is able to benefit from GIMI's movement forward also, but at the same time, make sure that we are tightly aligned, loosely coupled, but tightly aligned in the mission of democratizing innovation worldwide. So the idea here is not to create any reason to say we are different or we are competing, but to actually say we are similar, and perhaps there might be AI in GIMI before AI enters ISO for innovation, and somehow we can be the thought leader, the think tank, which is sitting in front of what's next, and therefore it continues rolling in and keeping GIMI relevant and also providing inputs into ISO. What are your thoughts in terms of what's the best way for a collaboration with ISO to make sure that we have a continuity and success for everybody?
I think the fact that we are talking now, it's already good, because I have not seen some of your competitors doing the same thing. So that's a very good thing that you are taking a proactive approach and you're trying to understand at least what ISO is doing. I would recommend the members of the board and the members of this organization to get to know this standard, to read it, to include it. I would probably, from a marketing point of view, put something on your website that it says that we are actually closer to this standard. I would probably also recommend that in your practices, in your consulting, you start talking about ISO and you start talking about the standard. It's not competitive, to be honest with you. It does not compete with you. It's actually something that would add value to you, because ISO, as we said, in many, many countries is a vehicle and you can ride that vehicle easily. You probably know that also, Mr. Cristianov, in your own country, and Dr. Hitendra, you know, in the UAE, if you say I am actually aligned with ISO, that opens up more doors for you. Of course, as I said earlier, not all countries welcome ISO and not all countries know about ISO. So this is a very case-by-case situation. In some countries where the government is really kind of has some sort of reservation or some sort of hesitation, if you will, with consulting companies or consulting groups, ISO is the safest way, because ISO is an international recognized organization. So I think all these things, Dr. Hitendra, would be very, very helpful. And again, as you and I talked a while ago, I am interested in being part of your board of directors. And if this is something that you are willing to grant me, I'm happy to be as your reference point for any information, knowledge. You will be up to date on all these things. So this would be, again, a win-win position for myself, but also for GIMI. I think you need to have a source that will give you these updates on what's going on in ISO. And what I explained earlier, those 5 or 6 standard, it's not only one standard, it's 6 or 7 standard. For instance, some of you perhaps will be asked to do assessment. How do you assess an innovation management system? What are the tools? Well, you use actually what we have came up with, which is the ISO 56004. And that's, by the way, a book that Jim and I am writing, and maybe it will hit the market in 2022 or 2023. It's focused on project management and focused on particularly on assessment. So you don't have to reinvent the wheels. You already have something in ISO 56004. And for your clients, when you were talking about that, your assessment is done according to ISO plus whatever GIMI is providing, that's also, I would think it's something that gives you more leverage. That's probably my answer to you, Dr. Hitendra.
That's great comments. I am interested in hearing from other people in terms of this collaboration between GIMI and ISO and Dr. Seed and anything else. So this is important, I think, and it certainly sets a path for all of us to continue working on. Dr. Sid, we have assessments for innovation management for companies. We have maturity levels of 1, 2, 3, and 4 in GIMI for companies. So they know where they are, and the gap between level 1 and 2 is a roadmap. So they can move from 1 to 2 on what exactly steps they have to do. And we have been doing that in the Dubai government for sure, where we assess government entities and show the gap. We also do that in companies in Colombia, in Brazil, to do this kind of things. The question I have on this certifications is, one is an innovation management certification for an individual. There's another one for a company, and the others for government and universities. Where is ISO going? Is it mainly for a company level certification, or is it going to drive for individual certifications?
No, I think ISO is only for organizational level, and ISO always focus on organization. It doesn't actually specify private, public, profit, non-profit. It doesn't specify any organization. As a matter of fact, we don't even use the term organization. We use the term entity. So anything that is a collection of a group of people trying to manage systems and resources together to achieve a goal for us is an organization. So ISO will never get into the individual assessment, but that's actually the leverage that you have as an organization, because you will have two. You will have the individual, of course, and the organization, plus the ISO. Now, I have looked at your assessment framework, and I think it's a very, very strong one. It's extremely developed with all the levels 1, 2, and 3, 4. That's an extremely well done. You can probably add ISO just for the peace of mind, if you will, of your client, specifically if your client wants to see ISO when you say ISO meets level 1 or level 2, because I think that's what ISO does. ISO doesn't get into a lot of technical things. ISO does not want to force a lot of things on people. ISO always, it's the minimum threshold that we can agree on as experts in terms of innovation that is in the standard. It's very, very simple to the generally accepted accounting rules. You probably have used them in your consulting practice. It's very, very similar to any framework that we agree with. And again, one of the things that excited me about ISO, specifically now talking about AI, is that as AI now is developing and accelerating day by day, hour by hour, and in the absence of national legislations to protect us or to help us make understand and make better decisions about AI, there is no national legislation. So at least we have a standard that will make us talk or speak the same language and at least avoid the same harm, because there is a standard. I'm very happy actually to speak to a global audience, and I travel a lot. And sometimes when I was in the US and I go to a different country, and then I see something happening in the airport, maybe a huge line or someone not doing their job in the police, they're controlling the passport, or someone is not, I say, do these guys have a standard? So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about basic understanding, a minimum acceptable level, a threshold that you can agree on. And that's where I would see probably ISO, and that's what ISO does. And then on the top of that, of course, you add the GIMI difference, which is level 2, 3, 4, and so forth.
Excellent. So Dr. Sid, please stick around. We should wrap this part up, and then we'll open up for a different sort of discussion. So Laura, after I wrap this up,